The concept of a prison break usually conjures images of tunnel digging or wall scaling, or perhaps a violent confrontation with guards at the gate. We imagine intricate plots involving smuggled tools and years of patient chipping away at concrete behind a poster in a cell. Yet history has shown us that sometimes the most effective methods are not the most complex, but rather the most audacious and absurdly simple. In the annals of true crime and prison history, there exists a story that defies the typical expectations of a high-security escape. It is the tale of a man who looked at the towering walls and the barbed wire and the armed patrols, and decided that he would simply mail himself to freedom like a common package. This remarkable event took place in the unlikely setting of the Willich Correctional Facility, located in the state of North Rhine-Westphalia in Western Germany. The year was 2008, a time when digital surveillance was becoming ubiquitous, and prison security protocols were considered robust and impenetrable. Willich was known for its stern architecture and rigorous inmate management systems, designed to hold criminals ranging from petty thieves to hardened drug traffickers. The facility operated like a well-oiled machine with strict schedules and constant headcounts, ensuring that every soul within its perimeter was accounted for at all times. The idea that someone could simply vanish from such a controlled environment seemed impossible to the administrator who ran the place with ironclad efficiency. The protagonist of this bizarre escape was a 42-year-old inmate whose name would soon become legendary in the German press for his cunning and sheer bravery. He was a Turkish national serving a 7-year sentence for drug trafficking offenses crimes that had landed him in the medium security wing of the prison. While he was not considered one of the most dangerous violent offenders in the system, his involvement in the organized drug trade suggested a level of intelligence and resourcefulness that the prison staff perhaps underestimated. He was a man who understood logistics and supply chains and the movement of goods across borders, skills that would prove unexpectedly useful in his confinement. Life inside the Willich facility was a monotonous cycle of waking up and roll calls and meals and work assignments designed to keep the inmates occupied and productive. The prison administration believed in the rehabilitative power of labor, and thus many prisoners were assigned to various workshops within the compound. Our subject had been assigned to the stationery department, a seemingly mundane role where inmates packed paper goods and lamps and other harmless items for shipping to outside vendors. It was a job that required little mental effort, but offered a unique vantage point on the flow of materials entering and leaving the secure zone of the prison. For months, the inmate worked quietly in the stationery shop, observing the rhythm of the daily operations, with the eyes of a predator watching for a gap in the fence. He noticed that while the human beings entering and leaving the facility were subjected to rigorous searches and metal detectors and identification checks, the outgoing cargo was treated with a different level of scrutiny. Pallets of boxes were loaded onto trucks with a regularity that bred complacency among the guards and the civilian drivers. The sheer volume of packages leaving the stationery workshop created a blind spot in the security apparatus, a blind spot that the inmate began to study with obsessive attention. The plan that began to form in his mind was as dangerous as it was simple, and it required a precise alignment of circumstances that might never occur. He needed a box large enough to hold a grown man, yet not so large that it would draw suspicion when placed among the other cartons of lamps and paper. He needed a window of time when the guards were distracted or absent from the workshop floor. Most importantly, he needed the unwitting cooperation of his fellow inmates and the delivery drivers who would unknowingly become his accomplices in this daring act of self-exportation. The risks were catastrophic, as discovery would mean an extended sentence and solitary confinement. He began to prepare himself physically and mentally for the ordeal of confinement within a cramped, dark space for an unknown duration. He studied the dimensions of the standard shipping cartons used in the workshop, measuring roughly 120 centimeters by 80 centimeters. It was a tight squeeze for an adult male, but it was theoretically possible if one curled up into a fetal position and remained perfectly still. He also had to consider the issue of air supply, as a sealed cardboard box taped shut for transport could essentially become a coffin if the journey took too long or if the box was buried under other heavy freight. The inmate watched the loading procedures closely, noting that the boxes were placed on wooden pallets and then wrapped in plastic film before being forklifted onto the waiting trucks. This plastic wrapping posed a deadly threat of suffocation, so he knew he would have to cut his way out or ensure air holes were present before the wrapping occurred. He likely spent sleepless nights in his cell rehearsing the movements in his mind, visualizing the layout of the workshop and the exact position of the cameras. Every detail had to be perfect, because once he was inside the box, he would be completely helpless and at the mercy of the logistics system. The day he chose for his escape was in November, a time when the weather in North Rhine-Westphalia turns gray and cold, and the days grow short. The gloom of the season perhaps added to the general lethargy of the prison staff, or maybe the busy holiday shipping schedule created the chaos he needed. He reported to his shift in the stationery workshop, just like any other day, blending in with the other prisoners in their gray uniforms. The air in the workshop smelled of cardboard and packing tape, and the hum of machinery covered the sound of his racing heart as he waited for the opportune moment. During the busy afternoon shift, the workshop was bustling with activity as orders were being finalized for the weekly collection. The guards were patrolling the perimeter, but their attention was divided among the dozens of inmates working at the tables. The inmates spotted a large carton destined for a lighting company, a box that was meant to contain lamp parts, but was currently empty and sitting in a blind spot near the loading bay. He knew this was his chance, the singular moment where his fate would be decided by a split-second decision to act. With a quick glance around to ensure no eyes were fixed upon him, the inmate climbed into the large cardboard box. He had likely prepared the bottom with some form of padding, or perhaps he simply accepted the discomfort as the price of freedom. He pulled the flaps of the carton closed above him, plunging himself into darkness. One can only imagine the adrenaline surging through his veins as he crouched in the tight space, listening to the muffled sounds of the workshop outside. He was now just another piece of cargo waiting to be processed. It remains a mystery whether he had assistance from another inmate to tape the box shut, or if he managed to seal it from the inside using a prearranged mechanism. Some theories suggest that fellow prisoners must have known and helped him seal the package, effectively turning a blind eye to his disappearance. Regardless of how the final seal was applied, the result was a perfectly innocent-looking box, sitting on a pallet ready for shipment. The inmate lay curled inside, trying to control his breathing and suppress any urge to cough or shift his weight. The most terrifying moment must have come when the forklift approached to lift the pallet containing his hiding place. The sudden lurch of the machine and the sensation of being hoisted into the air would have been disorienting and nauseating. He had to brace himself against the walls of the box to prevent it from tipping or revealing the uneven weight distribution inside. To the forklift operator, it was just another heavy load of industrial lamps, indistinguishable from the hundreds of others he moved that week. The pallet was loaded into the back of a waiting courier truck, along with other shipments from the prison workshop. The heavy metal doors of the trailer slammed shut, sealing the interior in total darkness and silence. The inmate felt the vibration of the engine, starting a rumble that signaled the beginning of his journey out of the concrete fortress. As the truck began to move, he likely felt the turns and stops as it navigated the prison checkpoints. This was the critical juncture, where guards typically inspected outgoing vehicles. At the gate, the guards would have checked the driver's paperwork and perhaps glanced into the back of the truck, but they did not conduct a thorough search of every sealed box. The assumption was that the cargo had been vetted inside the secure workshop, and the manifest listed only lamps and stationery. The truck was cleared to leave the facility and pass through the final barrier onto the public roads. The inmate had successfully breached the perimeter without cutting a fence or digging a tunnel. As the truck accelerated onto the Autobahn, the reality of his situation set in. He was trapped in a box in the back of a moving vehicle with no idea of his destination or how long the journey would take. The temperature inside the unheated trailer would have dropped rapidly in the November chill, turning his cramped sanctuary into a freezing cell. He had to endure the bumps and sways of the road, his body, aching from the contorted position he was forced to maintain. The journey lasted for some time as the courier truck made its way toward the distribution center or the next delivery stop. Inside the box, the air would have become stale and hot with his own breath, contrasting with the cold exterior. The psychological strain of total darkness and the lack of control over his movement must have been immense. He was entirely dependent on the driver, who had no idea he was transporting a living human being along with the commercial goods. Finally, the truck came to a halt and the engine was cut. The silence returned, and the inmate knew he had to act quickly before the doors were opened by warehouse staff who might discover him. He used a small blade or sharp object he had smuggled into the box to slice through the cardboard and the tape. He pushed his way out of the carton, emerging into the dim light of the truck trailer like a butterfly emerging from a chrysalis. The inmate found himself alone in the back of the truck, which was parked perhaps at a rest stop or a depot. He saw that the rear doors were secured, but the canvas sides of the trailer offered a potential exit route. He slashed through the heavy tarpaulin covering the side of the truck, creating a slit wide enough to squeeze through. He jumped down onto the asphalt, his legs stiff and cramping from the journey, but functioning well enough to carry him away. It was the truck driver who eventually discovered the evidence of the escape. Upon reaching his destination, or perhaps during a routine check, he noticed the slashed tarpaulin and the damaged cargo inside. When he inspected the load, he found the empty box with a hole cut from the inside and realized with horror what had happened. He immediately contacted the police and the prison authorities to report the anomaly, initiating a frantic chain of communication. Back at the Willich Correctional Facility, the absence of the inmate had likely been discovered during the evening head count. The guards would have scoured the cell blocks and the common areas, unable to locate the missing prisoner. When the call came in from the trucking company, confirming that a man had likely cut his way out of a shipment, the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The administration was forced to admit that they had been outsmarted in the most humiliating way possible. The police launched an immediate manhunt, scouring the area where the truck had stopped and setting up roadblocks in the vicinity. They released the description of the 42-year-old fugitive to the media, warning the public not to approach him. The story broke in the German news outlets and quickly spread across the world, capturing the imagination of the public. There was a grudging respect for the ingenuity of the escape, even as the authorities condemned the criminal act. The escape caused a significant scandal for the North Rhine-Westphalia Justice Ministry, which faced tough questions about security lapses. How could a full-grown man pack himself into a box and be loaded onto a truck without anyone noticing the weight difference or the irregularity? The incident highlighted a glaring vulnerability in the prison workshop system, where the focus on production had seemingly overshadowed the imperative of security. Investigations were launched into the protocols at the stationery workshop. The staff were interrogated, and the other inmates were questioned to determine if there was a wider conspiracy. It seemed improbable that he could have pulled this off entirely alone, without at least a lookout or someone to help seal the box. However, the code of silence among prisoners meant that few actionable details were forthcoming, and the fugitive took his secrets with him. The manhunt continued for days, with police following up on leads and sightings across the region. The fugitive had a significant head start and likely had connections in the criminal underworld who could help him disappear. For a time, it seemed, he might have vanished completely, perhaps fleeing across the border to the Netherlands or further afield. The sheer audacity of his exit suggested he was a man with a plan for what came next. While the fugitive enjoyed his brief taste of freedom, the prison system underwent a rapid transformation. New rules were implemented requiring all large outgoing packages to be scanned or physically inspected before loading. The trust that had existed between the workshop supervisors and the inmates was shattered, replaced by a regime of suspicion and double checks. The mail yourself out method was effectively closed off for future aspiring escapees. The story of the man in the box joined the pantheon of great prison escapes, often cited alongside the Alcatraz breakout or the Great Train robbery. It served as a reminder that no matter how high the walls or how advanced the technology, the human desire for freedom will always find a weakness in the system. It demonstrated that the human element, the boredom of a guard or the routine of a driver, is always the fatal flaw in security. Eventually, the law catches up with almost everyone, and the fugitive life is a hard one to sustain indefinitely. Whether he was captured days later or managed to stay on the run for months, the legacy of his escape remained. He had exposed the fragility of the prison system and humiliated the state apparatus with nothing more than a cardboard box and some packing tape. His story became a cautionary tale for wardens and a legend for prisoners. The psychological impact on the prison staff at Willich was profound. The realization that they had literally handed a prisoner his freedom and loaded him onto a truck was a professional embarrassment that would linger for years. It forced a reevaluation of how inmate labor is managed and how the intersection of commerce and confinement is policed. The stationery workshop, once a place of quiet industry, became a focal point of security paranoia. In the end, the man who mailed himself out of prison proved that imagination is the most dangerous weapon an inmate can possess. He did not use force or violence. He used the assumptions of his captors against them. He understood that people see what they expect to see, and nobody expects a package to contain a person. It was a magic trick performed on a grand scale, with his own life as the wager. Today, the Willich facility operates with stricter controls, and the legend of the escape is likely told in hushed tones by new inmates to the fresh arrivals. It stands as a testament to the lengths a human being will go to escape a cage. The image of that box sitting innocuously on a pallet, while a heart beat fiercely inside, is a powerful symbol of the enduring struggle between captivity and liberty. The case remains a favorite subject for true crime enthusiasts and students of criminal justice alike. It poses uncomfortable questions about the nature of incarceration and the fallibility of control. If a man can mail himself out of a high-security facility, what other cracks exist in the facade of order that we take for granted? It challenges us to look closer at the world around us and question the security of the systems we rely on. As we reflect on this incredible story, we are left with the final image of the slashed tarpaulin flapping in the wind on the side of a parked truck. It is the signature of a ghost, the only trace left behind by a man who refused to be contained. The man who mailed himself out of a German prison may have been a criminal in the eyes of the law, but in that moment of escape, he was simply a human being reclaiming his agency against impossible odds. The legacy of the Willich escape serves as a permanent footnote in the history of German corrections. It is a story that will be recounted whenever security experts discuss the vulnerabilities of supply chains in secure environments. And for the rest of us, it is a thrilling reminder that reality is often stranger and more creative than fiction. The man in the box has secured his place in history not for his crimes, but for his spectacular exit.